Welcome to the deep dive. You sent in these excerpts, and yeah, we're about to unpack some truly interesting stuff today. We're diving deep into Don Cunningham's Secret Weapons of Jujutsu.
Right.
And, forget what you might think about samurai and swords for a minute.
Yeah, we're going beyond the usual image.
Way beyond. Exploring this surprising world of, like, everyday objects and, well, less conventional weapons in Japanese martial arts, even law enforcement history.
That's right. And these book excerpts you sent, they offer a really fascinating glimpse, I think, into a side of Japanese martial culture that, well, it often gets overlooked.
So what's our mission today, then?
Our mission basically is to uncover these unexpected roles of non-sword stuff.
Okay.
How they connect to self-defense, police work, even some, deeper cultural ideas.
Okay.
Prepare for a few aha moments, hopefully, as we sort of distill this knowledge down.
Let's unpack this. The samurai, first thing you think of, sword.
Right. Absolutely. Katana.
In Cunningham's book, it really sets the stage, reminding us of this almost sacred connection. The sword, the daisho, that pair, long and short.
The daisho. It was practically a badge of honor, the soul of the samurai, they called it.
Wow. Soul of the samurai.
Yeah, it wasn't just a weapon. It was deeply symbolic. Status, skill, all wrapped up in those blades, and Bushido, the code, really emphasized its proper use.
But okay, here's where it gets, for me, really interesting. Despite all that reverence, drawing the sword wasn't something you did lightly.
No, not at all.
Bushido actually frowned upon just, whipping it out for any old reason.
Oh.
Why was that? Can you elaborate a bit?
Well, there were several reasons. Firstly, a samurai who drew his sword without real justification. He was seen as, well, crude. Ill-mannered, even.
Okay, so social pressure.
Definitely. And secondly, there were practical things to consider. Swords, especially the good ones, they were often family heirlooms, big investments.
Right. You wouldn't want to chip your great-grandfather's blade in some back alley scuffle.
Exactly. Damaging one in a minor fight would have been foolish. It really speaks to a certain level of restraint expected, even from warriors.
And I think I read something in the excerpts about actually making it harder to draw quickly.
Yes, that's right. It wasn't uncommon for samurai to tie the tsuba, the handguard,
Yeah.
to tie that to the saya, the scabbard, with maybe paper or some twine.
Oh.
Partly to prevent accidental damage, like bumping it. But it also meant, drawing it in a flash just wasn't going to happen.
So the daisho, in peacetime anyway, was functioning more like a symbol of their class than an immediate weapon.
Pretty much. And that act, tying the tsuba, it also kind of hints at a broader reluctance to just jump straight to violence, even for guys whose whole identity was tied up with weapons.
Okay, so if the sword wasn't always the first choice, or even easily available, what were the alternatives? This leads us towards unarmed combat, doesn't it? Jujutsu.
Precisely. The book touches on this idea that these limitations around sword use, they sort of created a space, a need for unarmed fighting, jujutsu.
And the origins go way back.
Way back. Even traced back into Japanese mythology, apparently. The gods Kashima and Kadori were said to have used techniques like this.
Mythology. That's a pretty wild starting point.
Yeah.
What was it about the myths? Was it about, like, divine strength or something else?
It seems the accounts often emphasize a more subtle approach. Yielding, technique over just brute force. That's a concept that really resonates with how jujutsu developed later.
Interesting. And the book mentions some early, maybe more historical examples too.
Indeed. There's that legendary wrestling contest Emperor Suinin ordered like almost 2,000 years ago between Nomi no Sukune and Taima no Kuhaya.
How does that end?
Pretty decisively. Apparently, Nomi no Sukune trampled the other guy to death, so maybe not so subtle that time.
Oof, okay. And later on?
Later, in the more turbulent times before the Tokugawa shogunate, you see the development of kumyuchi, which is basically grappling in armor on the battlefield.
Right, makes sense. Now, what about the whole China connection? There's always that debate, isn't there? Purely Japanese or influence from the mainland.
Yeah, Cunningham acknowledges that debate. He mentions accounts crediting Chinese techniques.
What kind of evidence does he point to on either side?
Well, some theories look at similarities in grappling, striking techniques found in Chinese martial arts, suggesting it could have come through trade, cultural exchange, that sort of thing.
Wow.
But Cunningham also highlights scholars who argue for a really distinct, independent development right there in Japan, rooted in their own combat traditions, battlefield experiences.
Still debated.
Still debated. But regardless, the book gives us a glimpse into some of the early schools that popped up.
Can you give us a few examples? What were some of these early styles like?
Sure. We've got Takenouchi-ryu, supposedly founded way back in the 16th century. It might have had influence from Yamabushi.
Those are mountain ascetic guys, right?
Yeah,
Known for being tough.
exactly. Wandering mountain ascetics, spiritual discipline, but also martial skills. Then there's Kito-ryu, which some people do connect to Chinese Kempo.
Okay.
Yoshin-ryu, the Willow Heart School. That's a great name.
Willow heart. Why?
Based its techniques on the idea of a willow branch in the snow, how it bends and yields to the weight but doesn't break. Flexibility, yielding to force.
Nice analogy.
And Tenjin Shinryu, which really emphasized Atami's striking vital points. So even early on, you see a pretty diverse range of approaches.
So what this really tells us is, yeah, the sword was central to the image, the icon of the samurai. But there was this whole other world of martial arts developing right alongside it.
Absolutely. Born out of necessity, different philosophies.
It definitely adds another layer, doesn't it? Hits that multiple perspectives thing we were aiming for.
Exactly. So while the sword had immense symbolic weight, it wasn't the only story. Not by a long shot.
Okay, so moving on then.
Yeah.
If swords weren't always practical or allowed, what else did people actually use? This gets us into the secret weapons idea, right? Improvise stuff.
Yes. This is where it gets really clever. Everyday objects often had a hidden purpose. The book talks about the obi that sash around the waist.
The belt thing, yeah.
That seems to have been a key place for carrying all sorts of items.
What?
Well, the obi was pretty wide, often thick, double-sewn material, so it worked like a utility belt. You could carry medicines in an inro that's a tiered case.
Oh yeah, I've seen pictures of those. Often really decorative.
Right. And a pipe case, writing stuff like brushes and ink, even small knives or eating utensils, all tucked away in the folds of the obi.
And these weren't just carried passively, were they? The book mentioned something called tenuchi, using these handheld things in a fight.
Exactly. What's fascinating is how these everyday items could suddenly become defensive tools. Held tight in the fist, they could be used for striking, thrusting, even blocking an attack.
So like a makeshift knuckle duster or something.
Kind of, yeah. It's similar to the more formalized yawara stick techniques you see in some jujutsu styles. Basically, impromptu fist loads for protection.
So it's not just having something in your hand, it's knowing how to use it to focus force. Turning, I don't know, a pipe case into a mini striking tool.
Precisely. It makes sense, right? You use what you have.
Totally. Now the kogai, that one really stood out to me. Described as a skewer carried with the sword. But its purpose seems a bit mysterious.
The kogai is definitely intriguing. Some theories suggest battlefield use, like for identifying a head you'd taken, thrusting it through the ear, top knot, grim stuff.
Yikes.
Others think it was just a grooming item, you know, for fixing your hair or cleaning your ears.
Bit of a difference there. Battlefield ID versus ear pick.
Right. But then the excerpt from A Daughter of the Samurai gives this much more nuanced picture.
Yeah, I remember that. It said it could lock the sword in its scabbard. Be used as chopsticks. Even pierce a dying comrade's ankle as a mercy thing.
And act as a silent challenge in clan foods. You leave it in a dead enemy's ankle, showing your clan crest.
Wow. That's a lot of potential uses for one little skewer.
It truly highlights the resourcefulness, doesn't it? And the layers of cultural meaning packed into these objects. This simple skewer isn't just one thing. It's like a microcosm of samurai culture. Practicality, ritual, symbolism, even that stark reminder of mortality and loyalty.
Makes you look at everyday objects differently.
It really does. Then we have the shoku, the fireman's axe. Your first thought is, okay, tool for fighting fire.
Exactly. Tearing down buildings to make fire breaks, right? Especially in crowded cities like Edo.
That was its main job. But the book notes it could also double as an impromptu truncheon in street fights. Which kind of fits, given the tough reputation of Edo's firemen. They weren't guys he messed with.
Makes sense. And finally, maybe the most unexpected one, the shakuhachi. The bamboo flute.
This has to be one of the best examples, yeah. Associated with Zen Buddhism and the Komuso.
Right. Those wandering priests, often masterless samurai, ronin.
Yeah.
With the basket hats hiding their faces. Very mysterious figures.
Exactly. And because they weren't allowed to carry swords.
So what did they do?
Legend has it, they actually redesigned the shakuhachi. Made it longer, thicker, sturdier. Specifically so it could be used as a club for self-defense.
Get out. A flute club.
Basically, yeah. This necessity being a ronin, needing self-defense but banned from carrying swords, it directly led to this really ingenious adaptation.
That's a perfect example of a surprising fact. Necessity driving invention. Really cool.
Definitely a great aha moment there.
Okay, so we've gone from everyday items used defensively, sometimes pretty brutally, Now we move into weapons specifically designed to be hidden. Hibuki, the book calls them, secret weapons.
Yes, hibuki. It's a broad term covering a range of concealed items. Things like knives hidden inside fan cases, sword canes, even hidden spear points.
Classic spy movie stuff.
Kind of. But importantly, hibuki also included those smaller handheld items we touched on, like the yawara and tenuchi.
Right. Let's go a bit deeper on those as actual concealed weapons, short sticks, wood, or metal for hitting nerve points. But there was something about a cord, too.
Precisely. Often a short length of rope or cord attached, looped around the wrist.
What was that for?
Several things. It allowed the tenuchi or yawara to be thrown, maybe as a distraction, and then easily pulled back.
Cover.
The cord could also be used to maybe ensnare an opponent's limb or weapon, and significantly, for restraining someone.
Yep, tying them up.
Yeah. The book mentions Japanese police assistants, the sort of non-samurai helpers, developed really intricate methods for restraint using these cords, sometimes called torihimo, which means bird rope.
Bird rope. And there was that anecdote in the source about someone's father finding one of these implements and his reaction.
Yeah, it highlights that there was a sort of nuanced understanding about what was considered appropriate for different people or situations, even when it came to self-defense tools. Not everyone should just carry everything.
Interesting social dimension there. Then we have the manriki-kusari, the weighted chain.
That sounds pretty much like what it is, a short metal chain, maybe a foot or two long, with weights on each end.
Its use.
According to the book, mainly for disarming opponents, wrapping it around a sword arm maybe, and for capturing or restraining them. Simple but effective.
Okay. And similar to the yawara concept, but made of metal. So tetsu.
Exactly. A short iron bar, basically, sometimes with a rope loop or maybe a metal ring for a better grip. Again, used for striking those sensitive nerve points, pressure points. Very focused impact.
So we've covered swords, then everyday stuff turned into weapons, then deliberately hidden weapons. Now, what about when an everyday item evolves into something more formalized, like the fan?
Yes, that's a really fascinating progression. Moving beyond just concealed fighting tools, you see everyday objects evolving into more formalized defensive implements, often blending that practicality with cultural significance, and the fan is a perfect example.
It seems like such an innocuous thing, a fan.
Well, the book starts with the sensu, the basic folding fan, and it wasn't just for cooling off, it had tons of uses.
Like what?
Merchants apparently used them like little notebooks for appointments. Cultured folks wrote poetry on them as gifts. Women used them to hide expressions, maybe for flirting. It was just everywhere in society.
So making the leap to a weapon, maybe isn't that huge a leap after all?
It seems almost natural in that context. And that leads us to the Tessen, literally iron fan.
Okay, so what was that exactly?
It could be one of two things. Either a folding fan, but with sturdy metal ribs instead of bamboo.
Giving it some heft and strength.
Right. Or it could be a solid bar made of iron or heavy wood, just shaped to look like a closed fan when held.
Ricky.
Very. And it quickly became both a symbol of authority for some officials, maybe, and a discreet self-defense weapon. Especially useful in places or situations where carrying a sword was forbidden.
Like inside certain buildings, or maybe for commoners who weren't allowed swords at all.
Exactly. Or even for samurai when they were off-duty, doing chores, relaxing. It was something you could carry almost anywhere without raising eyebrows.
The book also mentions the gunbayuchiwa, the war fan. That sounds more obviously martial.
It was a solid fan, usually roundish, not folding, often made of iron or wood, sometimes covered in leather, displaying the commander's clan crest or symbol.
What was its main purpose? Signaling troops?
Primarily, yes, used on the battlefield for commands. But it had a defensive role, too. The book tells that famous story about Takeda Shingen.
Oh yeah, the famous warlord.
The very same. Apparently, during a surprise attack right in his command tent, he used his gunbayuchiwa to parry sword strikes from an enemy general who burst in.
Wow, with just a fan.
Well, a solid iron or wood fan, but still. It shows its potential as a serious defensive tool.
Okay. And then there was the gunsen, another type of war fan.
Right, the gunsen was a folding war fan made with heavy ribs, specifically for armored samurai, the bushi, to use in the thick of battle for both attack and defense.
But the Tessen, the iron fan, seems like the one that really captured the imagination, maybe. The book's full of legends about it, especially involving Minamoto Yoshitsune.
Oh, absolutely. Yoshitsune, the famous tragic hero. Legends say he learned Tessen Jutsu, the art of the iron fan, from Tengu.
Those mythical bird-like mountain creatures, martial arts
The
masters.
very same. And then there's his legendary encounter with the giant warrior monk Bengiki on Gojo Bridge in Kyoto.
What happened there?
The story goes that Yoshitsune, maybe just a teenager then, used only his Tessen to deftly parry Benki's massive Naginata spear, eventually disarming him without even drawing his own sword.
That's incredible. Using a fan against a huge monk with a spear. No wonder there are legends.
It certainly highlights this almost magical perception of the skill involved. And it wasn't just legends, the Yagyu.
Weren't they the official sword instructors to the shoguns?
That's them. They were also famous for their iron fan techniques. The book mentions recorded instances of Yagyu masters winning duels, even killing opponents with blows from a Tessen. So it was definitely a respected martial art.
Do they all look the same, these iron fans?
No, the book breaks down different shapes and materials. 3 basic shapes. Sensugata, like a normal folding fan. Myogigata, shaped like a dancer's fan. And Gunsengata, like the military folding fan.
And the materials.
Range from Menharigata, that's the folding type, with metal or heavy bamboo ribs covered in paper or cloth, to Tenorashigata, which was solid iron, and Matsushaku, solid wood shaped like a fan. Each had, different weights, different feels.
And presumably different levels of decoration, too.
Oh, yeah. Some were very plain, purely functional. Others had elaborate lacquer work, inlays, maybe depending on the owner's status or taste.
But the key point about tetsushaku-jutsu, the art of using these short metal things like the Tessen, was that it was mainly for self-defense, right? Not necessarily for killing.
Primarily, yes. It aimed to incapacitate, control, disarm, rather than deliver a fatal blow like a sword. It offered a more controlled, less lethal option in many situations, which fits with that earlier point about samurai sometimes being reluctant to draw their swords.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's shift gears slightly to another really significant secret weapon that also became a symbol of authority. The Jutte.
Ah, yes, the Jutte, that sort of iron truncheon, most famously used by feudal police.
It's fascinating how it evolved from just a tool into a real symbol of law enforcement in the Edo period.
It was definitely a practical weapon first, really effective for parrying sword strikes. That little hook or flange near the handle, the kagi, was designed to catch a blade.
Right, I saw pictures of that hook.
And you could use it to strike, restrain, disarm someone without causing, the kind of serious injury a sword would. Think of it maybe like a medieval police baton with a special feature.
Okay, so its utility is probably why it got so popular with the Edo police, the Daishin, and their assistants.
Almost certainly. And as the book notes, eventually it really transcended that practical function to become this clear symbol of official status. If you saw someone carrying a Jutte, you knew they represented the law.
There's that whole interesting section in the book about the name itself, the controversy around how to pronounce it and all the different kanji characters used to write it.
Yeah, that's quite revealing. Different characters giving slightly different meanings. 10 hands, suggesting maybe the power it gave the user.
Like having the strength of 10 hands?
Perhaps. Or truth hand, implying justice.
Yeah.
Or even 10 levers, focusing on the mechanical advantage.
It's fascinating how those different interpretations might reflect how people thought about the Jutte over time, from tool to symbol.
Exactly. And its origins are also a bit murky, debated.
Right. The book mentioned a couple of theories, one connecting it to the hachiwari.
Yeah, the hachilari, or helmet splitter, which was a sort of sharpened metal bar used on the battlefield. Some think the Jutte might have evolved from that.
And the other theory, something about horses.
The symbolic connection to the hananeji, the horse nose screw, it was a tool used in training valuable horses, kind of like a twitch, maybe.
Okay. How does that relate?
The idea is that carrying something associated with controlling valuable assets like horses became a symbol of responsibility and high rank. So the Jutte might have inherited that symbolism. It's an interesting thought.
It is. And the book even mentions Miyamoto Musashi's father.
Yes, his school, the Jisutori-ryu, apparently included the Jutte in its teachings, which again highlights its recognized martial significance, not just as a police tool.
And just like the Tessen, Jutte weren't all identical, were they?
Not at all. They came in various styles. Some were very plain utilitarian iron bars. Others were quite decorative, maybe with ornate handles, special forging.
And the book suggests this might have related to the user's status, like a regular patrol officer versus an inspector.
That seems like a logical connection, yeah. An eriteme, an inspector perhaps, might have carried a more elaborate Jutte as a badge of office, while the street-level dashin, or okapatiki, needed something sturdy and practical.
And it's really interesting to see how the legacy of the Jutte lives on today.
Absolutely. The book points to the Tokushu Kaibo.
That's the modern Japanese police baton, the spring-loaded one.
That's the one. It's seen as a direct descendant. And many of the techniques used with it, taught as part of taihojutsu, the police body-arresting art, are apparently rooted directly in ancient jujutsu.
Wow. So there's a clear line of evolution from feudal law enforcement tools and techniques right through to the present day.
It really underscores how effective and, well, enduring these basic principles of leverage, control, and less lethal force have been.
Okay, so we've looked at the weapons themselves, from improvised to concealed to formalized tools like fans and Jutte. But the book also talks about the strategy behind using them, right? The mindset, the tactics.
Yes, absolutely crucial. Now that we've explored the fascinating array of physical tools, let's delve into the equally important mental and tactical approaches. How did these practitioners actually think and move?
Right. It mentions shifting focus from just the physical object to the mental game.
Yeah.
Things like mental preparation, heijoshin and mushin.
Correct. Haidoshin, often translated as everyday mind or ordinary mind, it's about maintaining calmness and composure, even under extreme pressure, not getting flustered.
Like keeping a cool head.
Exactly. And mushin, or empty mind, or no mind. That's about achieving a state of focused awareness, being fully present in the moment, free from distracting thoughts or fear, reacting intuitively.
Sounds very zen.
Yeah.
Hard to achieve, I imagine.
Definitely. Both are cultivated through really rigorous, dedicated training. They're crucial for effective combat.
Then there are the more physical tactics. Ma'ai.
Ma'ai. That's about maintaining the correct distance, the engagement distance between you and your opponent, knowing the right space to be effective and to be safe.
And Trisabaki. Body movement.
Kaisabaki, yeah. Efficient body movement, evading attacks, redirecting force, positioning yourself advantageously. It's fundamental in pretty much all Japanese martial arts.
It's not just about blocking, it's about moving out of the way or using their movement against them.
Precisely. Avoiding the full force of an attack and ideally creating an opening for your own counter.
And the book talks about timing, too. These different sen concepts.
Right, timing is critical. The book outlines 3 main concepts: sensen no sens, sen, and go no sen.
Okay, break those down.
Sensen no sen is like the ultimate timing. It's anticipating your opponent's attack before they even initiate it, maybe even perceiving their intention and striking first. Highly advanced stuff.
Wow. Reading their mind, almost.
Kind of. Then there's sen, that's attacking simultaneously with your opponent's attack, intercepting their move as it begins.
Okay. And go no sen.
Go no sen is maybe the most common understanding of a counterattack. You respond after their attack has started, maybe after you've blocked or evaded it, capitalizing on an opening they've created.
So 3 different ways to seize the initiative based on timing.
Exactly. Each has its place, its advantages. And finally, a really key strategic principle: kazushi.
Kuzushi, that means unbalancing, right?
Yes, unbalancing the opponent. It's central to so many Japanese combative arts, especially things like judo and aikido, which grew out of jujutsu.
How does it work in this context?
By disrupting their posture, their balance, using leverage or movement, you make them vulnerable. You take away their base, their power. The book gives examples like using their own forward momentum to throw them. It's about efficiency, using their energy against them.
So it's not just about the weapon. It's about mind, distance, movement, timing, and balance. A whole system.
A complete system,
Yeah,
exactly.
the book actually shows some of these techniques being applied with the Jutte, or Tessen, doesn't it, in the tetsushaku-jutsu section.
It does provide a brief overview, yeah. Illustrates things like how to grip the implement, different ready stances or kame, ways to draw it.
And defensive moves.
Blocking techniques, yuko waza, parrying techniques, nagashi waza, sort of flowing deflections, even throws, naige waza, and holding or pinning techniques, ose waza.
Applying those principles like kuzushi.
Exactly. It gives a glimpse into the practical application. Of course, the book rightly emphasizes that these illustrations are just that you really need expert, hands-on supervision to learn this stuff safely and correctly.
Definitely not a DIY guide.
Absolutely not. But techniques like, say, a cross block, using the Jutte against a sword, or an elbow trap to stop a draw, or using it to help execute a hip throw, they clearly show how these principles of defense, control, and leverage worked with these specific tools.
Okay, one last area the book touches on, which seems really important for context, especially for the Jutte, is the social side of law enforcement back then.
Yes, the Tokugawa-era police system. It wasn't quite like modern policing. You had this whole hierarchy.
Right, the book mentions ranks like machibukyo.
Those were the top city administrators, samurai officials. Below them, Yuriki and Doshin, who were also samurai police, sort of officers and patrolmen.
And then the non-samurai assistants.
That's right, the Goyukiki and Okapiki, often former criminals themselves, or just commoners acting as informants and assistants, the ones probably most often wielding the jet in day-to-day situations.
Understanding that structure helps place the Jutte and its users, doesn't it?
Definitely. And the book also mentions hojojutsu.
The rope-tying art.
Yeah, the intricate art of binding prisoners with rope. Apparently, the patterns used could even indicate the prisoner's social class or the severity of their crime.
Wow, that's specific.
It is. The book also briefly touches on interrogation methods relying heavily on confessions, sometimes obtained through, well, torture and the types of criminal punishments used back then. It paints a broader picture of the justice system, or lack thereof sometimes.
And it even mentions figures like Nizumi Kozo, sort of gentleman thief.
Yeah, these outlaws with honor, almost Robin Hood-type figures in folklore, and the structure of the underworld with the oyabun and the bosses controlling their nawabari, their territory. It adds this whole fascinating cultural layer beyond just fighting techniques.
So wrapping this all up, this deep dive into Don Cunningham's Secret Weapons of Jujutsu, drawing from the excerpts you sent. What are the big takeaways?
Well, I think we've definitely uncovered the surprising versatility of everyday objects, how things like fans and flutes could become weapons,
Yeah, that was really eye-opening.
and the sophisticated techniques of self-defense that existed alongside the sword culture, not just separate from it. Jujutsu, Tessen jutsu, Jujutsu.
And the symbolic weight these tools carried. The Tessen and Jutte weren't just implements. They were symbols of authority, status, or a particular way of life.
Absolutely. Plus, understanding the broader strategic thinking mind, timing, distance, and the social context, especially for law enforcement in feudal Japan. It all fits together.
Thinking about that resourcefulness, turning everyday things into tools for defense. It really speaks to a mindset of adaptability, doesn't it? Especially given the kinds of sources you, our listener, often find interesting. This ingenuity in unexpected places seems like a recurring theme we uncover.
And hopefully by exploring these excerpts you sent in, we've provided, a bit of a shortcut to being well-informed on this niche topic, delivered some of those aha moments.
Yeah, showing there's definitely more to Japanese martial history than just the katana, cool as it is.
Much more.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. Considering the ingenuity and adaptability we saw in how these secret weapons were developed and used, what other seemingly ordinary aspects of history, maybe things you encounter every day, might hold equally surprising depths if you just take a closer look?
Makes you wonder about the resourcefulness born out of necessity, doesn't it? And the cultural values hidden in practices or objects we might otherwise just glance over.
Something to chew on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.